great scenes here.
Yeah, just counting down the seconds until they can celebrate.
It is there and they are home! The Hawks are home in the 2008 Grand Final!
So Hawthorn have done it. The first team in the 18-team competition to go back to back to back.
Clarkson's a genius, so I think he should be credited with a lot of this.
And look at a team that has to be considered one of the greatest teams this unbelievable game we love so much as Emma's team.
What is the peak of this sport? That question seems easy enough to answer. Premierships. The ultimate goal of any sport is championships. And in the AFL, it's all about the team. Yeah, there are individual accolades, but there isn't really a GOAT debate, nor is there a focus on personality. Instead, the memories that last lifetimes in this game are those of the team. When great teams have sustained success, they leave behind legacies. Because, as history shows us, success is possible. Sustained success is hard. Really hard.
Years since it's been none in the three on the back of a
and
premiership.
The
Came on the back of a 16-0 run last year and Kane. There's problems. The Suns.
So when a team wins 2 premierships in a row, it's remembered. And when they win 3, well, they go down as one of the greatest teams of all time. There's only 2 that have done it in the modern era, and the fight to determine which of them sits as the best of all time remains alive. Recency bias will point to the most dominant football club of the last 40 years, and their blistering run from 2008 to 2015, which included 4 flags, 3 coming all in a row from 2013 to 2015. So, nearly 10 years on, how should they be remembered? And the ultimate question, are they the best to ever do it? Hawthorn saw one of the healthiest runs in history when they went to 7 straight grand finals in the 80s for 4 premierships, with another 3 flags on either side of the decade. This untold dominance deserves its own story, but the short side is that coming into the mid-90s, like all good things, the glory years Hawks came to an end. And just 5 years after winning the 91 premiership, Hawthorn came dangerously close to merging with Melbourne.
In Melbourne, there have been extraordinary scenes at tonight's historic vote on the future of both the Melbourne and the Hawthorn football clubs.
The merger attempt was thwarted, and the Hawks built into the new millennium with the ebbs and flows of any team. They were mid-table through 2 years of footy, making and then winning a couple of semi-finals before fizzling out. But the reason it's important to talk about this era is because of what they pulled off in that off-season of 2001.
Well, the draft's been good to us here at Channel 10 as well. Anthony Hudson, welcome back.
Great to be back, Jared. I was overlooked again by the AFL clubs. So
well might you say that. At pick 46, Jared Waite went to Carlton and my heart skipped a beat.
I don't think you had to worry there.
When defender Luke McFarlane, who had only been at the Hawks for 2 seasons, requested a trade home to Western Australia, the Hawks had to weigh up their options. Their decision was to sweeten the deal by adding Trent Crode to the block with the intention of bulldozing the 2001 draft. Sending those 2 to Fremantle, they got pick 1, 20 and 36, the former and latter resulting in Luke Hodge and Sam Mitchell. This trade is arguably the single most important event in what would eventually shape a 4-time premiership side. Those 2 shaped the professionalism and leadership that would be vital in the winning culture that was bred. Pre-2004, Hawthorn coach Peter Schwab famously stated that Hawthorn could win the premiership on the back of promising young guns.
It was an error of judgment by me, and for a few reasons. One, I hadn't really discussed it with our playing list, so that probably took them by surprise. I tried to make a statement that we'd win the premiership, and then I wanted to qualify it by saying, well, you know, that's what we should be aiming for if we're in a competition.
Almost ominously, the Hawks would fall to a horrific 4-win season. Peter Schwab was fired mid-season. Shane Crawford broke his arm and would miss most of the year and give up the captaincy. Most players were forced out or left that year, and Hawthorn, in a matter of moments, were in absolute tatters. Given the legacy that he left behind, it's surprising to know that the hiring of Alistair Clarkson was a weird one. The assumption was that the Hawks were going to gun for high-profile coaches that were proven commodities. Terry Wallace and Gary Ayres were the expected targets. And so when Hawthorn chased an unknown Port Adelaide assistant, everyone was understandably confused. What was received with even more confusion was Clarkson's first decision, which was mainly to blow up the list. He delisted many older players and instituted the club's first youth policy. Hell-bent on a built-not-bought list, Clarkson did everything he could to convince the club they needed to ransack another draft. And that they did. When Lance Franklin took a scholarship to Wesley in Perth and then played a senior game for Perth at just 17 years old, people knew he was ready. But taking Buddy meant you were signing on for more than just a football player, and some clubs were scared of that.
Yeah, I think spoke to about 5 or 6, maybe seven clubs, but I think it's a bit of a whirlwind. But yeah, I can't really remember too much of exactly what went on in the interviews. I think there's a few well-documented things that went on in my interviews.
And that same draft year, the Hawks made 2 other key splashes that would form the backbone of premiership success. Jared Roughead and Jordan Lewis round out a stacked 2004 top 10, both going to the Hawks in what is easily one of the most successful draft hands of all time. Jared Roughead was a ready-made forward. His high leap and incredible set of hands, without being a dead-eye set shot, played perfect foil to Buddy, who was less a contested mark and more an athletic beast on the ground, whose foot skills could not be matched by anybody. They created a twin tower key forward rotation that could not be stopped. And Jordan Lewis was a competitive gun. He was hard at the contest and slick around stoppages. Together, him and Ruffy were the quintessential members of that Hawks side. They were professional, they were courageous, and they bled brown and gold for a very long time to come. Alastair Clarkson was a disciplinarian. He combined elements of the old game with modern ways of thinking and communicating. And there was a level of ruthlessness at Glenferrie Oval that you wouldn't find anywhere else in the league. There was an expectation that if you put on that kit, you adhere to the Hawks' way of doing things, even if you had a personality outside of the game. And for most part, the players fell in line. 2005 was nothing to write home about, but there was no truer progression of a team than the way Hawthorn conducted themselves. There was serious promise out of the young Big Five, with all winning Rising Star nominations and Luke Hodge winning the best and fairest whilst finishing 4th in Brownlow voting in just his 4th year. Now, we'd be remiss if trying to categorise this team as the greatest to ever do it without exploring some of the strategies that led them there. Because surely, they had to have a point of difference beyond just good players. In 2006, Clarko implemented a box forward strategy, with Hawthorn's 4 tall forwards creating a box, instead of leading up to the goal square or forming packs. This strategy was effective at spreading the opposition's defensive tools and allowing one-on-one contests rather than large packs. Although often exposed on the rebound if marks weren't taken, it was the first of many intriguing tactics that would eventually shape the structure of the AFL, using the Hawks as an example. 2006 was an up and down year, but they finished 11th, which was an improvement, and the grounds for a 2-year, very important contract extension for Alastair Clarkson. 2007 was the first year where the Hawks looked remotely like the team we're talking about. They were disciplined, hard, and chalked up a 15-win season. The crowning moment of the 07 season came on elimination final day against Adelaide at the Telstra Dome. Most point to this moment as Lance Franklin's coming of age, when a 20-year-old Buddy took a mark 55 out from goal with the Hawks down 3. He turned around and didn't even second guess going straight for home. The degree of difficulty of that kick, near the boundary, on the wrong side for a left footer, beyond the arc, you would forgive any player for chipping it to the top of the square and hoping that someone else would do something spectacular. But the ease in which Franklin punted that thing straight through, you could just tell he was ready for the big time. Oh, and it's probably important to mention that that was his 7th goal of the day. The papers went crazy after that game. Buddy Franklin had arrived and was fast becoming a household name. Despite bowing out to North Melbourne the following week, the Hawks were on the right path, and that win against Adelaide could prove no bigger point in time to mark the beginning of the reign the Hawks would begin to enjoy over the next few years. Another important piece of tactical play that is attributed to Alastair Clarkson is a strategy that became known in the media as the Clarkson cluster. This was a defensive zone that, in simple terms, shut off access to the middle of the ground. In this era of football, the best sides were the fast ones, and there's no faster way to get from coast to coast than straight through the middle. So when Clarkson came up with a pyramid-style defensive structure high up the ground, rather than just sitting back in the defensive 50 man-on-man, it threw a whole lot of teams. Essentially, when the team coming out of the defensive 50 ran into the cluster in the middle of the ground, they were forced to play the ball wide out to the wings, in which the cluster would respond by closing around the football. It's too late to switch the play and too crowded to make effective kicks up the side of the ground. It was genuine genius, and it resulted in heaps of turnovers that set Buddy Franklin and Jared Roughead up for space in the 50 to kick barrels of snags. Apart from being an incredible strategy, the reason it worked was because of the footy brains and leadership that the Hawks had on field. Luke Hodge and Sam Mitchell were masters at directing traffic. They could focus on the ball and their own skills, while also keeping equal eyes out for teammates out of position or holes in the Hawks structure. They melded perfectly with Alistair Clarkson, who coached like a true tactician. Things always had to move and adapt, and if any part of it didn't go exactly to plan, they would be left massively exposed. But Clarkson's genius had the perfect on-field generals to ensure it remained genius, because there was no better on-field pointing than that done by Luke Hodge. Their big young keys were as good as they could have been. Lance Franklin famously kicked 100 goals, with the last coming against Carlton in a classic shootout with Brendan Favola watched by the entire nation. Buddy was the first to do that since Fraser Gehrig, and there's a decent chance he'll be the last as well. Interestingly, Jared Roughead kicked 66 goals that same year, which on its own would have won the last 3 Coleman medals. The Hawks were unsociable, physical, rough, and skilled. They conceded free kicks, but they brought a physical presence to each game that put teams on the back foot straight away. In 2008, they would head to the finals confident, but the accepted assumption was that the Cats would go back-to-back without breaking a sweat. They were just too good. When the Hawks made short work of the Dogs and Saints to face off against the Cats in the 2008 Grand Final, they were severe underdogs.
Hawthorn, the champions.
The cluster couldn't have worked any better. They stopped the Cats, the unbeatable Geelong, by taking away their quick corridor play in one of the most important upsets of the era. The stories were incredible. You had the young core in their early 20s paired with wiry veterans who were desperate for their first chip. The discussion had surrounded the draft hands and young guns, but the work of Trent Crode, Stuart Dew, Campbell Brown and Shane Crawford was not to be understated.
That's what I'm talking about!
There was some crazy stuff to come out of this game. You might look at the scoreline and assume that Geelong's inaccuracy was the sole cause of the result. And although it contributed, 11 of their 23 behinds were purposeful rush behinds by Hawthorn to quell any forward pressure that Geelong were attempting to put on. Then, out of the kickouts, Hawthorn were deadly. This around the ground intelligence was the perfect way to counter Geelong's midfield dominance. The rule was changed just the following year by the AFL that gave umpires the power to award a free kick in front of goal against a team who was deemed to purposefully rush a behind without pressure. So, this young team had just won the premiership and were poised to take over the league. So now, here's this.
What they don't have, I don't think, is the quality of some of our players, but they don't have the psychological drive that we have. We've beaten Geelong.